In that case, I'm just going to start. The first thing I wanted to say was just I've been listening all day, and I just wanted to recap a little bit about something which seems to have emerged, which I think is really important, which I've been thinking about recently, which is to do with the relationship between user experience design, or at my company we call it user-centered design, which I guess is more or less the same thing, and accessibility. And I was talking to someone on the phone recently, and I was having a little chat with them. It's sort of like a free consultation. They wanted to give me a job, but it just turned out to be me geeking out at them about accessibility. And they had an application they were working on, which is for a really good cause. And they had designed that from Photoshop files, and the guy who led that design work, which was very good design work, they thought it out really thoroughly, was a self-described UX designer and not a coder. And I was helping them out by offering a few little pointers about some of the accessibility issues in there. And it did occur to me that it's this weird thing that we have in our industry at the moment, which is it's possible for someone to say, or it's seemingly legitimate for someone to say at the moment, I am a UX designer. I don't really do I don't really do accessibility, which is weird. It seems weird to me that they would be disconnected like that. So anyway, I'm interested in hearing more on that subject, and I think Henny and in Mike's aphorism in Billy's talk mentioned it as well, and it's been mentioned a few times, and I just think that's a good thing. So my talk is about current page links, which are links to the page that you are on. This is a relatively simple problem, or so you might think. I don't tend to engage with complicated problems because I don't have A, the talent, B, the knowledge, or C, the patience or inclination. I like fixing little problems like this. I think a lot of the complex problems we experience are actually created unnecessarily. I think as technologists, we're interested in convolution for its own sake, simply because it's a good way to legitimate our professional credibility. And a lot about accessibility is about simplicity. And I hope that this little task, which was to find a good solution to indicating what the current page was via a hyperlink, would be an easy one. As it turns out, it's not that easy. I wrote an article about it, in fact, and I came up with a few solutions, many of which I'm going to cover in this talk. And then I got a lot more solutions, many of them a lot better than the ones that I came up with in the comments. And I was furious because I thought I'd had it really covered, and I was really smug. And then there was some really, really good stuff that came out, and that upset me greatly, and I hate you all. But if we work together like this and make each other feel bad until the point that we come up with something really good, then that is all for the better. One thing I am very proud about with this article was that it got somewhere in the region of 44 comments. I say somewhere in the region, I counted them a minute ago as 44 comments. And I'm proud of the fact that I brought up a subject which is very, very accessibility centric, and yet it created a big discussion and a lot of interest, which I was really proud that I managed to get that conversation going. So I've noticed in my travels around the web that there is an awful lot of information there, and you're currently looking at a very trite representation of data. I've just got a bunch of zeros and ones and put them into a slide for you to look at. Most of the information out there is garbage. It's mostly useless information, or it's or pointless functionality. But there is a lot of good stuff out there as well. And ultimately, with that huge surfeit of information, amongst it somehow, if we're able to traverse it in a decent way, I'm hoping that we'll be able to glean something from it. I like to think that the web represents like a second enlightenment of man, where we can all sort of come together and somehow share our experiences and research things and find what we're looking for and answer some of the really big questions. Really big questions like, who am I? Those sort of ontological or existential questions like that. And of course, what is the point of all of this? Um, those two questions would be very difficult things to cover um, in a short talk about accessibility, which I wrote 2 days ago. And actually, my strategy for trying to answer these questions by using the glut of information that the web offers has been quite well. I haven't been very good at it. I mean, it's basically come down to just pressing the random article button on Wikipedia. And I have found some interesting stuff there about small towns in sort of rural Germany and things like that. But you know, it's not necessarily going to give me what I want. So I've settled for a much smaller question to be answered, and that question is, where am I? If I could just have that simple question answered, then I'd be a much happier man, and I'd find using the web a much more pleasant experience, should we say. So the great thing about the web is it does offer standardized ways of knowing where you are, being able to tell at what location you're at amongst all of that information, all of that structured information and interconnected information. And the main thing which is used for this, the main standard is the URL, or Uniform Resource Locator, if you're a Puritan, the URI. And this is something which has a known convention for spelling out, basically in a string of characters, whereabouts in the internet, or in the World Wide Web rather is probably a better term, we are at. So for instance, if I'm looking at an article on my website, I've got the protocol followed by the domain, so I know which domain I'm on. And then there's the subfolder represented by article, and then even though it's been rewritten by some sort of Apache directive, the name of the page itself, and it's unique. So the two words here sort of give you everything you need to know about URLs. Are just the first and the third really is uniform. So you know, it's sort of dependable. It's quite robust. Every link goes to somewhere unique in a distributed global system. So that's a nice dependable way of being able to work all these things out. And it's to do with location, and the fact that the byword address is used tells you everything you need to know about how it helps you know where you are. But let's imagine that we are living in a sort of futuristic, technophobic dystopia, where suddenly, and for reasons I can't imagine, the URL has suddenly become unpopular and unpleasant to certain parties. And I mean, this is totally hypothetical, of course. I mean, I don't think anyone would even begin to conceive of a reason to start to banish the URL, and I'm sure that no one will ever do it. I mean, if someone did do it, it would be the sort of people who made, you know, sort of futuristic military robots and that sort of thing that you'd expect to find in the illustrated dystopian sort of grubby scene that you're looking at in the slide. But without that, how do we know you are here, or where you are when you're in a certain location around the web? Well, you have to use certain conventions, I suppose. And I'm likening, for the purposes of this talk, this convention, this sort of marker, to being like in a shopping mall, where you would have the marker would say you are here on a map, and then because you know where you are, you know how to get to the other places. So you know how to get to such and such shop where you would buy some clothes that you don't need, or go to such and such bakery where you'd get some food between meals that you don't need to eat. So this you are here thing is kind of, it's the point at which you can then work out all of your different trajectories, I suppose. And one of the it's sort of like a way of making sure that you can escape as well, because actually I'm someone who doesn't like shopping in malls. So I'm very keen on the idea of knowing how to get out. So when I'm usually looking at one of those maps in a mall, it's to help me escape from the undifferentiated and depressing consumerism that's surrounding them. And we kind of need to do this when we're on the web as well, I think. When you are trapped somewhere on the web, let's say you're a keyboard user and someone has usurped your tab key so that you can't escape the page that you're on to close your browser, and you're stuck somewhere in the internet surrounded by trolls, accusations of being like Hitler, and just interminable memes and insults and YouTube comments. So we need to provide an escape route so that that keyboard user, perhaps pressing Shift Tab, can get to that address bar and change that address. Oh yeah, but he can't because there's no URLs in a futuristic dystopia. Okay, well anyway, so I want to talk about how we define where someone is just on within a website. Let's just break it down to that because that's simple enough, I think. So there are already conventions for this. So illustrated at the moment, what you're looking at is a sort of fairly typical navigation bar, which reads home as the first link, then about, then blog, then contact. The about link has a blue background to indicate that that's the active link amongst the navigation. So that corresponds with the page that you, on which you are currently situated. And this is a long-standing convention which has been used for many years. Sometimes incorrectly, people do tabs and they show the sort of forward-facing tab is the current page. You can get into a mess doing that because there can be this sort of confusion between what aesthetically looks like a tab and what is actually interoperably a tab, like the tabs which Leonie was talking about earlier, the ARIA tabs. But anyway, it's just the link which says here you are, so you know your context, and it's context that's important. So to mark up a navigation block like that, you would of course use the nav element, because ultimately that will the baseline semantics for that will be communicated to accessibility APIs. You add the role equals navigation to, as has already been recommended earlier today, make sure that all the user agents can also provide that. And the great thing about these landmarks, of course, is that you can press Shift F7 or whatever the key combination is for your particular screen reader, and it will bring up a dialog of links in one tab, and headings in another, and landmarks in yet another one. So you can go straight to that landmark. There are also keys which allow you to travel between landmarks. I forget which ones they are. I think R goes to the next one, and N back one, or something like that. Someone can correct me there in the comments. But the method we use to define the current link representing the current page is usually done with simply a class. And I bore myself talking about this because I've talked about it for a long time in many different places, in many different comment streams and different syndicators, that the class isn't interoperable. And so it only communicates things visually. And I know that you know that. I just wanted to sort of draw that line before we moved on to find out ways of communicating this properly. But as far as I'm concerned, classes are one of the biggest enemies of accessibility, because they give you that notion that you are creating value, or you're communicating more when you are, but you're only doing it visually. So I think the class, more than anything, represents the difference, represents that mistake where people think that UX is different to accessibility, that somehow that you deal with all of those things and you use those fancy icons and things like that, and that's an art in and of itself, and that you can just do that without worrying about what's underneath. So how do we communicate this stuff interoperably? We communicate it by providing text. Just about every instance of a truly interoperable piece of information comes down to text. And by interoperability, by the way, I mean it can be communicated to different devices in different ways. So text can be read and interpreted, turned into synthesized speech, or even used with a refreshable braille display. You can't do that with the pixel bitmap information of images or unsupported or uncommunicated Unicode characters or anything like that. You have to use text. Text is a very, very big weapon and a powerful tool when it comes to accessibility. So to solve our "you are here" problem, our this is the current page link within our navigation schema problem, we will have to use text. And so we'll have to use one of the following. I may have missed one or two options out here, but most of the time it's either a text node, which is, of course, exists inside, in between the two tags which make up an element. So, you know, that's very well supported, actually. If you're making a button, it's probably better to just use some text inside that button. I always find it weird when people have said to me, well, it's all very well using proper buttons without classes as control elements or action elements, whatever you want to call them inside your application, because you know I want to add some value, I want to do, you know, all of that again, and so maybe I want my different buttons to be different colors to represent different things like that. And I would say, well, have you tried just using text to do that? I mean, if you've got a save button, just have save as the text node. That's pretty accessible to everyone, really. I mean, it can be translated. I mean, there's no real sort of cognitive load there. You don't have to decipher someone's pretentious icon, which is supposed to represent save. I mean, how does a 14-year-old feel about a floppy disk anyway? I don't know. So there's the text node. That's a good one. Alt attribute, yes. Title attribute, probably not. Area label, one of my favorites. We'll be talking about that some more. Area label by, that's also good. And in brackets, area described by, which I'll be covering too. That's a great one because it appends, as we'll discuss, the text rather than simply replacing it. So here are the techniques. This is a mixture of techniques that I came up with in the original article, and some other techniques, better ones that other people came up with in the comments, and I've tried to distill them. So weirdly, and I didn't expect this, I do understand where people were coming from when they said this in the comments. I think Thierry suggested this, for instance, is to remove that link altogether specifically for users of assistive technology. So the idea is that this link is not for them. It's a distraction, or it's redundant. So just take it away, which is one way to go. So here's this sort of crass representation of that being removed. So how does that work? Well, the reason we're doing it, and one of the reasons which was suggested for doing it, was the worry that you would focus that link and think to yourself, oh, that must be a different page, because you've forgotten that you're on that page. And then you'd click it, and then it would reload. Now, if we were providing some accessible text, which could be announced, which said, oh, this is the current page, and we'll discuss this, then of course that's less of a problem. But the idea is that if it's a functional link, regardless of what the text is, the idea that you could click it and then bring it. Have I gone offline? Yeah, as Thierry has just said in the comments, and as I had already attributed to him, he says it's a redundant link. So yeah, but the fear is that it would reload the page and you start at the top of the page again, and then you'd have to climb all the way through, which is, you know, that's a legitimate fear. The technique to do this would be to use ARIA hidden. In the specification, ARIA hidden should, in almost all cases, it is recommended, be paired with the style. So you should probably use the ARIA hidden attribute selector, so just ARIA hidden in the square braces, and attach display none to that. Then you have your accessible state and your visual interpretation of that state tied together. In almost all cases, ARIA hidden should be used to hide things which are also hidden visually, and that's a misunderstanding, I think, a lot of the time. You can use it sometimes, and perhaps, you know, there's a case here that, you know, you could use it here to simply hide from a particular type of user, but that's a very dangerous path to go down, I think, and I'll explain more why as we move on. What it does create is some inconsistency here. By removing that link, or the link which corresponds to the page per page, you create a problem whereby every time you go to a page, the navigation is essentially different. And again, by the specification, the only landmark which should contain content whichever changes, which is by definition inconsistent, is the main part, because that's where all of the dynamic content would go. So the idea is that everything inside the role navigation should remain consistent, and equally everything inside content info. And there's good reason for that. It's because the behavior, the idea behind those landmarks is that they're tools which help you navigate that exception landmark, which is main. So there's that. Also, it sort of creates a bit of a blind spot if you take it away, because within the navigation, at least, if you arrive on the page and immediately open up the landmarks dialog and go straight to the navigation, you'll find that there's no indication of your context. So we've lost that "you are here." So if you were to imagine yourself using Google Maps, and there was everywhere you looked on Google Maps was a big sort of blurry patch. So the center of the map was always blurry. It's sort of, to my mind anyway, it would have that sort of effect where it's like with a shopping mall. To know how to get anywhere or to understand where you are, it has to be indicated. So, you know, that's one way of doing things, and there's a lot of supporters for that. Now I always say ARIA instead of ARIA. I know everyone's been saying ARIA today. I say ARIA, which is weird because I'm a southerner and I'm a bit posh, so I tend to say R's instead of as for a lot of stuff. So I'd say bath and not bath, and I even say Indiana Jones in the Temple of Doom, or perhaps that should be Indiana Jones and the Temple of Dom. But yeah, I've noticed today that everyone says ARIA. So I'm going to say ARIA, and I'm going to say Indiana as well, because that's actually the correct way of pronouncing that. So this time we're actually going to talk about what I originally set out to do. Now we've covered that sort of wildcard one there first, which is to, if we're going to indicate where we are, then I think we should do that for everyone. So how do we go about it? So the ARIA label, we just put the ARIA label attribute on the link itself, and we would put something like current page or active page or this page or something like that. And what we would get would be a list of navigation links which starts with home, and then on our active page it would simply read current page, if that is the attribute value, then blog, then contact. So it does provide at least some information to say that there is a link here and you are here. whatever that link is. You can pair it with CSS, and this is, by the way, this is the an important part of this for me is to have a way of doing this where you can use a selector in your CSS, which, like I was saying before, it's nice to pair state with style. So if you're using ARIA label, the nice thing is you can just use that ARIA label attribute selector there. You don't even have to have the value. It's just if the ARIA label in this context attribute is present, then that marks our current page. So you can base styles on that, which is nice. It ties things together. The problem is that it overrides the link's original text. Now, when I first discovered ARIA label and started experimenting with it and did a bit of testing, I think because of a voiceover bug at the time, I don't know whether that's still present on my iPad mini, it did append the ARIA label text to it. And then I got into that mode where, you know, sometimes you use one screen reader and you think, oh, that's how it works. And then you assume all the others do the same thing. But actually, that turns out to be buggy. And what should happen is that the ARIA label overrides whatever content's in there. So if it says about in the text node, then ARIA label will supersede that and replace it. The idea being that the ARIA label would contain text which clarifies better to people using assistive technology what's there than the original text. There is also, and Roger Johansson brought this up in the comments for that blog piece, a translation issue. Or perhaps he brought it up on Twitter, it's not really important. But there is also a translation issue if you think about it, which is that current page string is in the ARIA label attribute, which is in the code. So it's not part of the text of the page. So when you translate the page, that's not going to be translated. I mean, it's not like you get the French translation of a block quote, whatever that would be, or you know, the code isn't translated, and I suspect that unless you use some clever JavaScript, and you know, you want to avoid using JavaScript for this kind of thing as much as possible, you would have a problem there where it would say current page regardless of the native language of the page after it's been translated. Just a note on testing, there's a brief interlude here. I do mostly test with NVDA and Firefox because I find that to be the most dependable sort of combination. I then go on to test with JAWS, and illustrated here is a picture of JAW, which I test with a lot. This is the jaw of a small, I think, blue shark or possibly mako. I thought this would be a good visual gag for this talk that I did at the last minute. I actually cut myself whilst when I brought that jaw out to play with. It's still not as bad as testing with JAWS, the actual screen reader, but it did draw blood. But yeah, always test in JAWS. So here's the third method. This is the ARIA described by method. Illustrated at the top there is the CSS selector. So again, we can tie the accessibility of the added accessibility of that thing to the style which would have otherwise been attached to a class. So we don't have to manage a class and the state or the property separately. And then of course you'd have a DOM node on the page which contained that text current page, and you would associate those two things together via the ID. The good thing about this is that ARIA described by does in fact append the text to the link, which is really nice. So you get home, about, but then there's a short pause quite neatly, I think, in most screen readers that I've tested with. So you get about, current page, and then blog, and then contact. So it appends the text. Nothing is omitted. You get all of that information there. So that's good. And as I explained, you can still use that attribute selector in your CSS. Um, the div in the page can be translated, so that's really good because it's actually on the page, whether or not it's actually hidden. And I believe even if you hide the text node, um, it's it's okay. It will just still turn up. So I think that's all right. But so there you go. There's that problem. Uh, but does it scan correctly? I'm not sure. You have home, about, current page. That sounds sort of like it could be a link to somewhere within the page, which then tells you about that page rather than telling you that you're on the about page, if you see what I mean. So I don't know. Perhaps the wording could be changed there. Perhaps current page isn't the right thing, but you've got to be careful, of course, with that. And of course, there's extra markup in the page. I think that's a bit of a sort of first world problem. Um, a lot of developers who are a bit finicky about that sort of thing might not like the idea that with the navigation ships this other div, which would have to sit somewhere on the page. And where would you put it? And it's messy, and I don't like it. So you'd have to have that argument basically. The classic argument, this isn't performant, or this isn't neat, or this isn't dev readable, versus but it's accessible. So here's the fourth technique. Still not quite there. I think a lot of those have some issues. I'm sure Thierry will tell you all about them. Um, and the inert element is one way to go. So you can use replace the link which was there with a strong element. The idea being that you could add tab index 0 so that it's part of the natural tab order, and you could focus it and read that text. But crucially, um, although it says you are here, um, or well, does it? I mean, it sort of says you are here by being what was a link but isn't a link. Um, does that work? I don't know. Um, it is focusable, but it's a non-interactive element that you're focusing, and as a rule, that's probably a bad idea. It's probably something that wants to be avoided, generally speaking. Um, and again, it's the consistency issue. You kind of really want your navigation landmark to be kind of consistent across pages. You don't really want to be, I think a lot of users probably wouldn't want to see a lot of change in there, or a lot of manipulation of what's going on in there. You've got a list of items inside a navigation landmark. You expect them to be links in each one of those items. So that's going to be a bit weird and be a weird experience for some people. There's quite a lot of editing there as well, because you've got to replace the link entirely. And yeah, I mean, when this was suggested to me, someone said strong because they believed it was the most semantic way of doing things. But to be honest, I don't know what semantic strong really offers. So here's my rule of thumb: if it's not semantic, it's not semantic unless it actually says something. What I mean by that is you can fuss a lot about how semantic things are and how appropriate those elements are, but if they don't actually communicate something in an accessible, interoperable fashion, then you're not really dealing in semantics anymore. Same problem when people talk about the semantics of classes, like is this a semantically named class? That's not really what we mean by semantics when we talk about the web. We're talking about what a browser understands and therefore can communicate via its accessibility API to users of all varieties. So that's the rule of thumb. There's a priority of constituencies offered by the W3C for a reason, which is that you should consider users first, then authors are next important, then implementers are next important after that, and then finally the semantic, theoretical semantic purity of things. And I think the difference between a strong or a span in this case really goes into that territory of who cares. So finally, this is probably my favourite way of solving this problem. This is the same page link. So with the same page link, what you can do is you would harness that current link and you would point it to the fragment which is identified here as ID equals main. And I really like this idea because it gives you a lot of stuff for free. So the HTML would simply be changed so that that link which previously went to the page about simply goes to the main content within that page. Now note that although you're replacing the about, in each case that you replace it, whether it's for about or home or context or whatever the pages are, you can use the same attribute selector again. So that style can be attached to href equals main, that attribute selector, which I'm quite keen on. So it uses an existing convention, which is really nice because when you focus that link, it will announce the text node about and then say same page link, and that's an ancient and very well established way of communicating that it's something that goes to somewhere on the same page. So that's really nice. We can harness that. You've got the CSS and the document semantics tied together again, of course, which is good. Very little HTML editing because you're just changing the value of the href. It does remain a link. Now, navigation blocks don't have to just be landmarks which take you to other pages on the site. It's entirely conceivable that you would have a role navigation block which went to all the different pages and have another role navigation block on your page which went to different sections within the same page. If you were to imagine Wikipedia, which has its main navigation which takes you to different places within Wikipedia across pages, and then, although I don't believe they actually use a role of navigation, they could foreseeably use role navigation on the blocks of nested links that they have at the top of their articles quite often. Also, it doubles as a skip link. So the reason that the main element was conceived in the first place was because of this heavily subscribed behavior of wanting to get to the main content, which is why we have skip links at the top of our page to get us over all of the crap and banner adverts and junk which we've already waded through once and wouldn't like to do it again. So it's another way, it's doubled up that, I'm not saying necessarily you should then therefore get rid of your skip link, but now if that becomes a sort of a known convention, that's the sort of thing where you can get your dialogue up, go straight to your landmark, and then you'll expect to find a link which will take you to your the main part of the page as well. So as part of this discussion originally, I was talking to Leonie about ARIA Current, and she expressed some interest, and I couldn't find a link, unfortunately. So ARIA Current, I suppose, would be a standard for doing a lot of this stuff. And I don't know whether that would make it a lot better, but the idea at least proposed was that you could do steps as well. You could use ARIA Current to determine the current page that you're on, but also the current step perhaps that you're on within a continuum of a continuum of shopping cart screens, or like multi-page forms, that kind of thing. And if it's anything like ARIA controls, which offers some interesting additional functionality, for instance, in JAWS, you can when you focus on an element which has an ARIA controls relationship with something, then it will offer you the ability to go to that element by pressing a key combination. I think it's JAWS, the JAWS key plus Alt plus N, or N or something like that. And I wonder whether that kind of very specific behavioral thing, which actually allows you to do something special rather than just communicate the special semantics, might be might be interesting. That's actually it on that. I'm sorry I haven't been answering questions. It's very difficult to do that whilst I'm talking, but I'm happy to answer several now. Quick thing first, housekeeping. Um, Leonie mentions the area examples which I did before. They're not actually linked to from my website. If you want to go to them, there's the URL there. It's haydenworks.com/practical_area_examples, or simply search practical area examples, and that will be there. The reason I've not linked to it is because they're articles which are going to be integrated into a book, which I'm just completing now. 30,000 words on ARIA, and I can't even pronounce it. That book has been reviewed by Neville Bloody Bartos, aka Steve Faulkner. He made sure that I wasn't talking out my bum, so it's looking in good shape. Oh, last thing, thanks to everyone who bought a rock and roll or rock and amp roll t-shirt as well. It's the last day today on Cotton Bureau that t-shirt's going. All of the profits I make from that are going to the RNIB. So if you fancy a t-shirt with a sort of a hipstery symbol on it involving a guitar amp, please get in there. Thanks to everyone who already bought one. I know that a few of you already have, and that was really, really good of you. Okay, I am done. Questions? Cheers, Thierry. Area current hasn't actually been specified yet. It was a suggestion which Leonie came up with to try and solve this problem. Or perhaps someone else came up with it and then she developed the idea. Thank you, Debbie. Okay, no worries, Mike. Do we not have time for any more questions? That's all good.
No, Hayden, you still have about 15 minutes if there are any more questions for you.
Okay, great. Okay. Right. Oh, Thierry's got one. I can see it coming. Yeah, I think in my testing, yeah, I did a CodePen. I might be able to find that for you now. Where I don't have a screen reader running though on this laptop, I'm afraid. But yeah, no, I hid the element which was associated with the area described by with display none, and it still faithfully speaks that content, which is, I was worried about it. I was worried that that would be an issue, but actually it's fine. Or at least it was in JAWS and NVDA. A CSS content property, yeah, as in pseudo content. Yeah, it's interesting. I I think it can be used as it it can be a really useful tool in some cases, and it can be a real pain in the ass in other cases, depending on whether or not you want something like that to be announced. This, if you don't want it to be announced, the safest thing to do is to probably put it actually in the content and wrap it in a span which has an area hidden on it or something. But Yeah. Uh, yeah. Hi, Jonathan. I'm not sure. I really like that idea. It does still change the behaviour of what was previously on another page a link to a page. Um, I'm not sure. I can't think of. I like the idea that it's another way of getting to the main content, and I like how you can use a consistent a CSS selector for it as well. I would like to hear any. Okay. Um, yeah, I'd like to hear some other. Uh, if anyone has any cons about it that they can conceive of, I'd love to hear them because I think it's pretty good. Any of these things, of course, are tricky because you do have to get in there and change the markup per page. Um, but yeah. Daniel, was it you who came up with it on the blog? I think it was because it wasn't me. Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, all credit to Daniel on that one. Um, yeah, when yeah, Daniel submitted that idea and I jumped on it. I loved it. I thought that was the most sensible way of doing it, and I hadn't thought of it originally. Yeah, well, that's what it's all about, isn't it? Is you know, that's the cool thing about being in a community of people who just give a shit about doing these things and getting them right. And you get into these conversations, and that's why I was excited about there being so many comments. Although a lot of those comments were mine because I'm a gobshite and I can't shut up. But yeah, yeah. Ask me anything, Don. Oh, sorry. Yeah. I'll try and rewind. Yeah, we're looking for cons. One of the questions was, would you reiterate what you thought the biggest cons would be when swapping the current link with main? That was Jonathan. We pretty much agreed that there were few cons that we could think of. Um, there was another question. There was another question, probably previous to before I'd actually finished. Oh yeah, that's Steve's absolutely right. Yeah, which ATs use ARIA current? Um, it's not been specified or certainly not implemented yet. Yeah, that's exactly as he says. It's just an idea, you know. So I guess a possible future enhancement. we were also talking about whether or not ARIA described by if it was associated with a hidden element, hidden with display none, would it still work? And in testing, it seems that mostly it does. I haven't encountered a situation where it doesn't. I'm sending the current link to main, Thierry. Thierry asked, now I have a second thought. Why sending current link to main? We would possibly have a skip link which did that, but I see no reason why that link would go anywhere else really. I mean, the main content of the page is paramount, and I think that would be where I'd want to go if it was a link which said you're here. I'd want to be in the guts of whatever here is, and so that seems like the most logical place to go. And I think any opportunity to take people to past all of the detritus and garbage and adverts to that main part of the page is a good opportunity to take. So Thierry's doesn't like the idea of having two links which go to the main, the skip link, and also the link within the navigation. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I agree with that. I take his point about duplication and then perhaps being some redundancy, but I think with things like that, personally, I'd like there to be as many opportunities as possible to provide an important action like that. So Jonathan's asking, what are the thoughts on using it as a hypothetical attribute for styling purposes for now, or would you prefer we style href equals #link? Well, href equals #link would go to, unless you had a fragment on the page with the identifier link as its ID, that would go nowhere, and I wonder whether that would be confusing. Because sorry, you meant #main. Okay, sorry, Jonathan. I'm still going on after you clarified that. Well, this is So the question is, for styling purposes, does it make sense anyway? And I think what's neat about it is that you're tying the style with the function, so it's form that follows function. And I think there's that when we go wrong in trying to get things accessible, it's usually where we separate form and function arbitrarily for no good reason. And I think it's really important to take any opportunity to make something which has a function look in such a way that it elicits an understanding that is the function of it. So you have the highlight of the link in the navigation, and that highlight is sort of saying here, and then the main content is, as I said, like the guts, the heart of what here is. Yeah, it's like an unofficial ARIA current. It has a similar sort of, if I understand what you're saying there, yeah, I think it has a sort of similar. Well, maybe ARIA isn't necessary.
I hate to do this to you, Hayden, but we're gonna have to wrap it up because we have
that's good.
Another speaker coming up. But we really, I think we all really enjoyed your presentation. I'm really thankful that you were able to be part of this special day with us.
My pleasure. Cheers, Carl. I'll let you get on, but thanks everyone. It's been really cool, and enjoy the rest of GAAD, or GAD as I'm calling it because I'm an idiot. See you later.